factor that the Hungarian leading political circles regarded modernity and modernism all the time as an integrating factor in this very multinational kingdom of Hungary, and they really believed it was a general illusion, very convincingly described by my colleague Bálint Varga, that it is going to be modernity that is going to unify these very, very various people living in the kingdom. So it does not help either if we divide a society vertically into and distinguish old and new social strata. It means that old is from little peasant, rich aristocracy, and new is from industrial workers to factory owners. So this division doesn't help either. We can absolutely find anti-modernist groups in the two parallel universes, like dissatisfied industrial workers or members of the intelligentsia, urban intelligentsia, and so on. So finally, how we can grab these groups, as many times when a phenomenon is way too complex to describe it in its integrity, the historian does some case studies. I know that it's not always satisfactory, but I consider it as a very important first step in a long research project. So I would like to present two case studies, which I'm working with. Yeah, so I'm going now on the anti-modernist practices, which is the different part of the theory. And so now I'm going to do some dangerous thing because I'm going to speak about Croatian history to Croatian professional public. So sorry for that, and be kind to me at the end. So one of those, you can see the sources on the slides. I think it's the most important. I start very briefly with the second one, which is a research in an urban elite that is losing its position due to radical changes in direct surroundings. I'm talking about Szény. Very interestingly, the complaints sent to the Hungarian Maritime Authority in Fiume, Rijeka, and other lobby activities of the Commercial and Industrial Chamber of Szény are forwarded to the mentioned Hungarian ministries, and that's how all these documents are accessible to me in Budapest, in the National Archives, where in the material of these ministries we can find these complaints of the city. And so these documents attest a very complex attitude towards the asymmetric situation of the city in relation with the incredibly founded Fiume and towards modernization in general. So they reflect a desire to modernization on the one hand, and a very nostalgic feeling for times that preceded modernization. In this discourse, sailing appears as the age of night, a beautiful age of night of economic activities, and steamships became the symbols of a prosaic, profit-oriented world, which is dominated by machines rather than humans. So it's a very interesting and characteristic narrative of the two of the let's say the elite of this city. The other, I'm going back. Yeah. So my other case study is about the 1883 Narodni Pokret. And for that purpose, I revisited the archival material which created the basis of Dragutin Pavličević's famous and huge work about this year. So I revisited this archival material with two purposes. So first, I wanted to acknowledge the peasantry's capacity to show resistance against a number of developments, like the ever more aggressive penetration of the state into the lives of its citizens, and the rationalizing attempts made by the same political power. So to use the words of Irina Marin, who recently wrote a book about very similar peasant movements in Romania, I want to give back the agency of the peasant researchers to imagine that they could act according to a certain logic. And also my second goal was to nuance a little bit national conflict present in the course of the events. So every time I could, I tried to question if this is the valuable and the valid explanation or not. Actually, the 1883 events are called in Hungarian historiography anti-Hungarian and anti-modernist uprisings. I'm not sure that it is used in Croatian historiography. I have never seen. But in the works of Dinko Šokčević and others, that's the term commonly used. So in this case, anti-modernism is not my invention. I just wanted to emphasize that. So, of course, I would like to emphasize here the anti-modernist features of the uprising, not because I deny the national or the economic reasons behind it. On the contrary, I really think that they were brilliantly and in detail showed by Dragutin Pavlicevic and also, for example, by László Katus. So I just don't want to repeat all those things about taxes and everything. I would like to make a different contribution. As I went through the archival documents of the uprising, 7 factors popped up that are relevant to my questions. That is, they helped me to show that the countryside, how the countryside perceived the urban modernization and what were its reactions. So very briefly, I go through these 7 points. So first about the symbolics of the 1883 events, the literature is consensual, if not as the main reason, as the main excuse of the eruption of a real volcano of tensions. Historians identify the exposure of colonial coats of arms and inscriptions on the facade of different institutions. From the archival documents and also from the works of Stefano Petrungaro, another picture seems to appear. One of the most striking feature of this archival material is the high level of disorientation in peasants. It seems that the inhabitants of the villages had serious difficulties in finding the real target of their anger. Obviously, the biggest part of the villagers could not find any exclusively Hungarian flag, inscription, or coat of arms. Most of the time, the so-called common symbols could have been found, say, the one in the middle, which integrated the visual elements of both Croatian and Hungarian national symbolisms. But several times, the destroyed coat of arms or inscription was exclusively Croatian. This latter also happened when someone in the village told the masses that this is the case, so they are not finding what they are looking for. So like the priest or the schoolmaster told them that there is no Hungarian flag here, sorry, or something. In a lot of cases, villagers responded that it doesn't matter at all. So it seems that they were almost equally angry against every kind of state symbol, or at least we have to hypothesize that there is some kind of resistance against state power in general. And the peasantry was able to recognize the even more radical expansion of the state and was not happy about the omnipresence of the central power. Other factors let us think that this could be the case, so the resistance against a number of state competencies is striking, like the refusal of civil marriage, giving birth in public health institutions, giving children in the hands of state schooling, and so on. In these cases, the national question is secondary. The penetration of the central power in a sphere which was before considered as private is much more obvious to me. The second point is the high number of the attacks against local Croatian officers proves something similar, so it's the bureaucracy itself that was somehow irritating. These people represent not only the internal elite of the villages, but also the link to some hostile, distant center that could be, of course, Hungarian, but it could be also an abstract or a defined city. So Hungarians are present of the frequent use of the term Magyaron, even if it was very difficult to peasants to give a definition of this term. So also in the work of Stefano Petrungaro we can read about debates between peasants who can't really decide if it's offensive or not, so before court. It's not in 1883, but in 1897, for another uprising. We can see such a wide use of the term Magyaron that it makes impossible to define its precise meaning without entering into absurdity. The phenomenon, I think it's very similar to that was described by Irina Marin again in Romania in connection with the word student, which became a certain synonym of urban rebels who, in the eyes of the peasants, supported their movements. During a peasant uprising in 1907, they shouted, "We are the students," which obviously attests that there is a radical change in the meaning. This identification just could not be understood in the classical way, of course, with an alphabetized peasantry. So my third point, very briefly, is that urban modernization appeared, of course, also through clothing. So in the archival documents, one can read a number of cases when people were attacked because of the fact that they wore urban clothes. Seemed to be kaputashi and had expensive shoes or hats. The simple fact that kaputashi could become the synonym of the city people proves that the anti-urban sentiment was so strong that a whole vision of society could be built on it. I think here about the vision of the Radic brothers and their conceptions about city people and village people as very two different kind of social strata. The fourth point is the aggression against meter sticks, and that's why I was talking in Budapest about the meter system, and also the destruction of the maps. They had long been explained as the purely irrational expression of anger, and in the contemporary Hungarian press, this became really the symbol of some kind of barbarism, that masses just don't know what is good for them, so something like this. Why are they against the meter system? Contrary to this, it seems to me that this gesture fits perfectly in the logic of peasant actions. By the introduction of the meter system, the peasantry lost its usual measures and needed the help of educated men to manage the exchanges. The vulnerability of these communities, and vulnerability is a key word in modern experiences. So the vulnerability of these communities was accentuated by the decreasing agricultural prices, and so it could be a right feeling that the meter system brought only bad to people. The same is true to maps and land measurements, as cadastral surveys help to redefine the taxes, which usually increase significantly. So we cannot exclude the further explanation that the homogenizing and rationalizing state, which appears through people who measure things and rationalize everything, it was a factor of irritation, so why not? I also tried to re-evaluate the rumors that appeared everywhere in peasant communities. Also, they were long described as typically irrational, but they also can be interpreted as attempts to give a collective explanation to a situation of high instability and crisis lived through by everyone. Since these rumors functioned in order to mobilize the peasantry and also to legitimize the violence used by them, it's quite logical that rumors that were about new kind of absolutely unbearable taxes were omnipresent. If it was even credible that the state was going to tax marriages or newborns, It means that a revolting factor and one of the main concerns of the peasantry was the penetration of the state in the local and private sphere. My last but one point, so the sixth is the attack on modern communicational networks, like railway and telegraph. It's also a multifaceted phenomenon. These networks represented obviously the language question, also the national antagonisms, and also the physical penetration of the power in the countryside. It is also obvious that these networks represented modernity in the rural space and deformed its original hierarchy. All of these factors easily led to the reasoning that innovation is really a means of power. Being a constitutive part of a network is also a very typical vulnerable feeling that is a key moment in the experience of modernity. So being a part of network is a feeling of dependence from a center, of course, and from other elements of the same network. As Andreas Sipos formulated it, I quote, "Cities that had leading role in developing the transport infrastructure became also centers of innovation. But it is not only about technical and institutional innovation, but also a social type of innovation that required manifold learning processes and adaptation, so it required adaptation from people. The attitude that accepted as natural that everyday life depends on central supply systems and the personal world of people is bureaucratically regulated in a way never seen before, had to take form, and of course it needed time." Finally, it's just one word about the anti-Semitism of the 1883 events. They were regarded as marginal, and Dragutin Pavlicevic even claimed that they were the reflection of their Hungarian counterpart. So the biggest anti-Semitic incident in 19th century Hungarian history, which was the Tisza blood libel. I do not want to exclude such a transfer. In the archival material, I have found 4 documents that attest this kind of transfer. So one of those is printed, so it means that it could be a lot in a lot of exemplaries. But actually, 4 in this whole huge number of documents, it was not really enough convincing to me. So I think we cannot exclude this transfer, but also we have to very simply face the fact that it's about here an example of anti-capitalist prejudices and intensive scapegoating, which is very typical in these kinds of events. Yeah. So these were my points, just to sum them up. So Steve Fuller, who's a philosopher and sociologist, claims that in our future, the political left and right will entirely lose sense, and our political preferences will be determined by our attitudes towards technology. Actual social questions are already greatly structured by the exclusive or democratic models of access to techno-scientific innovations. By using these considerations in a historical material, I hope to make visible a social cluster that was pretty invisible for historians and which had the differentia specifica of attesting resistance against new power relations through unequal distribution of modernizational accomplishments. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Veronika, and I would suggest that we listen to the both of the lectures, and then at the end we will discuss it together. So maybe now.
We could change our program.
Okay. first. Thank you for accepting. Okay, so everybody is invited to discussion.
Is there any question?
Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. I'm Zrinko Novosel, also a participant on this project. Well, my question relates to this binary concept of modernism and anti-modernism. And it's interesting to me to note that you mentioned the author, which I didn't get the name of, that argues that, in a sense, anti-modernisms influence the course of modernisms themselves. Which is very interesting to me because is that where we should look for originality in a sense of anti-modernisms? Because does anti-modernism implies only a relation to modernism? Because if a stream of intellectual thought or a system of knowledge takes its own course and it's against the modernism, is different from modernisms coming from, say, Western Europe, does it automatically imply that it's anti-modern? Or is that where we should look for originality in a sense? And do we really need to strictly speak of anti-modernisms in all the cases that are not modern? I don't know if I'm... Could you, the idea of the author, I didn't get the name of, that said that sometimes this transfer works also backwards from anti-modernism and influences the modernisms as well. So, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so it was Maria Todorova. But anyway, yes, there is a conception in literature that this kind of anti-modernist political interest, like the agrarian populism, for example, is an Eastern Central European characteristic. So we can search for authenticity and originality at this point. Of course, not everything is anti-modernism, which is against the rapid modernization. So we can speak about, for example, conservatism or neo-conservatism, which are very, very different. They are not really centered on this collective type of regeneration. In general, they are against mass politics. And there is a lot of differences between, say, it is of course not all the time about anti-modernism. Anti-modernism is a very complex system of ideas, which is sometimes full with elements that are contradictory one to each other. So, yeah, it's not very easy to treat them, but of course not everything is included. Say that kind of concentration on collective regeneration, organicist development, and a certain kind of violent or radical change. These are all features of anti-modernism which are different from other currents. I'm not sure I have answered, but I hope so.
Thank you.
Someone else?
No others. My name is Drago Roksanic. Listen, it has been really a pleasure to listen to you, and you have introduced so many relevant topics, that it's not that easy to react in a moment. But I would like to rely upon your objection. While working with students of mine, I've been suggesting them to read Samuel Eisenstadt's essay on multiple modernities. If you use that concept, which is legitimate. That's what I've been doing since 1980s. You know, you have to know that modernities can be competitive to each other. You know, there is no global modernity which is unquestionable or providential or whatever of the kind. You know, so that is the most, what can be modernity in Hungary does not necessarily has to be modern in Croatia. You know, so it always depends how do you actually define the concept. This is, to my mind, very, very important. On the other side, and actually you are perfectly aware of that, you know, those binary oppositions, modern, anti-modern, are today too simplistic. Maybe at the time of the dominance of structural theories, it functioned. You know, today it doesn't function because we are perfectly aware that, that's what you know for sure, that peasants from all those regions which were affected by movements, 1883, 1897 and so on, you know, were not obsessed with traditionalism. What was their answer to the lack of perspective in their environments? Immigration for the United States actually didn't go to the States in order to, how to say, reconstruct their family lives in Croatia. Quite the opposite. They went there perfectly aware that they will change dramatically conditions of their lives. You know, so when you speak about their mindsets, you know, and intentions, aspirations, and so on, you have to be perfectly aware that it's not only about that traditional vocabulary which dominates in local conflicts and so on, you know, because it reflects problems which they do not necessarily understand, which they project in another frameworks and things like that, you know. But actually, what's really their need is to change conditions of their lives. You know, if you put it in a larger global context, so to say, you'll get totally another perspective. You know, it's, and so on and so on. I could comment some of other points you have been introduced to your presentation, which I have to say that I appreciate very much your interest in international, transnational, those global aspects of those problems. But that's what we do have to accept. There are competing modernities all the time in Europe. You know, agrarian ideologies are not necessarily traditional in the Czech countries, in Denmark. You know, they are industrialists and things like that, you know. So from that point of view, there is always about competing worldviews, needs, necessities, and things like that, which can produce in terms which are now used, because theories of modernization are invented in the 1960s, not before. We have to go, as you are doing, to Begriffsgeschichte, to notions which were used at the time.
Okay, so about multiple modernities, of course, I'm aware. I think it's very important that they have a common feature. They believe in the fact that the way a society can be, a society can do better is through modernity. At the same time, anti-modernisms can be very, very future-oriented. Sometimes they are maniacally techno-scientifical futurists in a way. They are just anti-modernism is only a label to say that these are alternative visions, and that's why I think it's very important. I try to show in the definition that anti-modernisms sometimes work not from outside but from inside of modernity. So that was, yeah, this is it. So that was the two very important parts of this definition. And so in the introduction of this book, anyway, there is a lot of words about the future-oriented alternative visions, which are also called anti-modernisms. So of course, it doesn't want to be a binary opposition between modernism and anti-modernism. This is a collective label to express this kind of critical attitude, which I tried to describe in my previous answer. So I think that can be important. And thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you very much. My name is Teodora Bernardic, and I'm also a participant in this project. And thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I really listened to you very carefully, and I was one of the participants in Balázs Trenčini's project. I wrote 5 pieces on Croatia in the first and second volume. And my question is, what about Catholic anti-modernism? Catholic anti-modernism. You didn't mention a single Catholic case. And I think in this liberal era that the Catholic Church, as we know that there was a culture war waged against the Catholic Church in all around Central Europe. And although we have liberal archbishops, but in general, Catholic Church was some kind of symbol of medievalism, of something that is anti-modern. And I know that you mentioned this issue of clothes. I know from my experience in the 18th century, so preachers, parish priests, they were steadily preaching against fashionable clothes. So in each epoch, they were anti-modernist because they were afraid that this will be corruption of morals. And so I was just wondering if you will touch upon this issue in your research. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's a very interesting thing that Catholic anti-modernism, which was called by contemporaries also as anti-modernism, which is rare because otherwise this is a new label invited by historians. So the curious thing in Hungary, I can speak about Hungary because I had researches about Catholic anti-modernism in Hungary. Is that expressed through a very aristocratic way. So Catholic anti-modernism was represented by bishops and aristocrats in the upper house of the Hungarian parliament. And there was really a huge opposition against the introduction of civil marriage. There are researchers who say that it was Hungary where it was the most difficult to introduce civil marriage in the region. There are very interesting cases when, for example, a priest of Komárom was 25 times put in prison because of his resistance against the christening of children